So good afternoon, everyone, for our friends from Hawaii, and good morning to our friends from Malaysia. Welcome to this high-impact fireside chat on the future of renewable energy and decarbonization. This is actually a very critical piece of our global climate solution puzzle. While the challenges may differ, both Hawaii and Malaysia share common ground as tropical regions. Both of these regions are rich in solar potential, but at the same time, we are facing socio-economic uncertainties and the urgent need to reduce emissions while maintaining growth. This uncertainty demands innovative, adaptable, and inclusive energy strategies that deliver not just environmental outcomes, but also economic and social resilience. Whether through policy, innovation, or finance, the pathway to net zero requires urgent and coordinated action. We are very honored to have with us here today three distinguished regional leaders who each play a vital role in shaping the energy transition. From state-level clean energy policy to industrial decarbonization to market-based emissions trading. First, we have Ms. Monique, who is the Managing Director of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. She's from Hawaii State Energy Office and a pioneer in renewable diversification and subnational leader. Ms. Aurora, she's the manager of Bursa Carbon Exchange, Malaysia's pioneering voluntary carbon market manager. And last but not least, we have Mr. Hoong, the managing director of Solarvest. He is the key figure in industrial decarbonization and always provide end-to-end clean energy innovation to the clients that Solarvest has. So this fireside chat today will explore first, how Hawaii diversified clean energy strategy can be leveraged as a learning point for Malaysia transition beyond solar. Second, the role of end-to-end decarbonization solutions in achieving real net zero progress. Third, how carbon markets can be leveraged to complement renewable energy efforts. And last but not least, today serve as a cross-learning opportunities between the subnational leaders from Hawaii, Honolulu to Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia here, facing the similar economic and climate pressures. So in short, the fireside chat today is not just about clean energy, it's about shared experience, mutual learning, and shaping a resilient and decarbonized future for tropical nations around the world. However, I also wish to make a disclaimer on behalf of the speaker here. All of them the views today do not represent their organizational views. For instance, Hawaii State Energy Office, Bursa Malaysia, and Solarvest, they are just here today for purely educational purpose. And if you have any question, feel free to write in officially to the respective organization. So without further ado, let's give a virtual round of applause to the speaker here today. Okay, so I think I don't want to hold the floor any longer. Perhaps we can just start our fireside chat right now. So first of all, to begin, each of you works with very different but equally important levels for decarbonization, from policy and infrastructure to market mechanisms and corporate strategy. Can each of you share how you or your organization prioritize decarbonization efforts and what sectors or emissions sources are most urgent in your region? Perhaps, Moni, you want to start first?
Yeah, sure. Aloha, everyone. Thank you so much for having me join you today. It's an honor and privilege, and always great to interact with international colleagues. I think we have more common than differences. So more in common than we do differences, and I think we're all kind of tackling this together on what I like to call our island Earth. So to start, Hawaii does have a net negative greenhouse gas emissions target. And collectively, what that means is by 2045, we are supposed to sequester more emissions than emitted as quickly as practicable, but no later than 2025. We also have an interim target of 50% reduction by 2030. So these are in law, so they are in our state statutes, and we know it's going to be a huge challenge. We're certainly not on track to meet the emissions targets, but we do have a few policy levers in our pockets that are really core to the work that I do at the State Energy Office. So just a bit of background. Most of our emissions, about 88% of our emissions, are from the energy sector. So that is inclusive of electricity generation, our largest contributor, followed by aviation, and then ground transportation. Marine transportation makes up a smaller portion of the energy sector emissions, but by far, it's still the stationary combustion or electricity generation that makes up the bulk. And that's important too, because as we decarbonize the transportation sector, we're really relying on a clean electricity grid through electrification of transportation. The reason the majority of our emissions are high for stationary combustion is because we only have today about 30%, a little over 30% of our generation coming from renewables. So as we established our renewable portfolio standard, which is 100% renewable energy by 2045, we've made a lot of progress, but we've also largely ignored a larger issue, which is the fact that we burn low sulfur fuel oil or petroleum and really inefficient power plants for the bulk of our generation. So that is a huge challenge, and we are definitely in the midst of focusing on solutions that include build out of renewables, but also kind of taking a look at our thermal generation fleet and seeing what we can do to improve it.
Yeah, I can see that the ground transportation, which use a lot of fossil fuel, is the most urgent issue to be solved in Hawaii, right? I guess it's also very similar in Malaysia. So maybe Ching Hong and Aurora, you can jump in to share your organization's decarbonization effort. And in your opinion, what is the sector that you feel we should tackle right away?
Maybe I can go first.
Yeah, sure.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us today on this beautiful Saturday morning and on Friday night in Hawaii. I'm Aurora from Bursa Carbon Exchange. So Bursa Carbon Exchange is a subsidiary wholly owned by the national stock market, Bursa Malaysia. And then we are given the mandate by the government of Malaysia in 2022 to operate the voluntary carbon market. So it is rather new. So in Malaysia, I think it is similar with Hawaii, and actually in most of the country, the biggest emissions usually come from the energy sector. But Malaysia is very unique in its own because, as one of the 17 mega biodiversity country, we also has the potential or is being the carbon sink of the world. So that means that it is also very important to stop the deforestation in Malaysia. So carbon market is actually a climate finance trying to channel the funding from global north or companies to help developing countries, least developed countries, to start climate mitigation project in their respective country. So as you all know, in every year conference of party under UNFCCC, we talk about the money that developed countries need to provide to the developing countries. And last year we achieved the NCQG. I forgot the full name of it. It's called New Collective Quantified Goal, that the developed countries agreed to provide 300 billion by 2035. But in fact, this is very far from the actual number that the developing countries need to tackle climate change. The actual amount is actually above $1 trillion US. And that is a big gap. So that's how carbon market can come in, trying as part of the climate toolbox, trying to bridge this gap by creating this market mechanism and trying to bridge a funder and also the host country to support the mitigation project in these countries. So I think I can stop here. Probably we can discuss further later in our following questions.
Yeah, I think carbon markets serve as a very interesting solution, in fact. So we can hear more later. And meanwhile, Chin Hong, feel free to share your view.
Yeah, allow me to introduce myself. I'm from Solarvest EE. Okay, it's managing director for Solarvest EE. Just now, when we say Solarvest, managing director will be our group under the group directors. So I'm just a subsidiary of Solarvest Holding Berhad. All right, I think to continue the questions of the organization focus on the decarbonization for Solarvest, right? So in Malaysia, so we will have a very clear guidelines stated by the National Energy Transition Roadmap, which covers 6 transition layers, which is EE, which is energy efficiency, renewable energy, hydrogen, bioenergy, green mobility, and last but not least is the carbon capture. Right. So Solarvest has a few strong pillars like EE, RE, and also the green mobility like charging stations. So we do all of the solutions that we have right now is actually to help the clients to achieve RE100. We are the clean energy experts, not only the solar, but to help the clients to achieve the RE100. Yeah. So this is our bread and butter. So we do not. So the focus of the priorities of the decarbonization efforts would be more focusing on the major energy consumers who are monthly bill about the maybe the 250,000 and above, right? They are complied to the latest act enforced by the local government, which is ECA, that they need to comply by next year. So EE play a very good big role in helping them to comply. At the same time, to find opportunity in the energy efficiency improvement. Then later on comes in the on-site solar, off-site solar, and then renewable energy certificate. Then they are able to achieve the RE100. So that's where we are right now. Yeah, over back to you, Kar Ling.
Yeah, actually, it's very interesting to hear how your organizations have done so far. So just now, Monique did also mention that Hawaii actually has a goal of achieving 100% of renewable energy by 2045. And as for Malaysia, we have a very similar target as well. We hope to actually achieve 70% of renewable energy by 2050. So as these two regions are very similar with our ambitious target, so what are the key lessons that your national governments can draw from? And also maybe you can relate back to your own organization. So you can share your achievements so far and also some of the challenges that you have encountered while doing this transitional journey. So on this note, maybe Ching Hong, you want to start first? We do reverse now. Yeah, Ching Hong, you can start. Maybe any key lessons or achievement that you would like to highlight to us, and any challenges.
Yeah, I think the key right now is the I100 is very new to the market. Only the how to say is the net zero is actually very new to the market, especially the SME. We actually see the participation is actually from the big company or the reputable companies. So the solutions right now in Malaysia or in local in Malaysia is not so the awareness is still need to be improved where Solarvest is actually trying to educate the market where actually in Malaysia there's a company called Solarvest. We provide the full integrated services solutions to help them. It's actually not far for them to achieve at least for net zero, I mean RE100. So a bit background about the RE100 is actually to actually get the green green source from the grid where they can actually achieve the renewable energy 100%. Right. After that, then we talk about the transition from scope 1 to scope 2. Then we talk about the supply chain, which is under the number scope 3. So it looks far from us, but Solarvest is actually educating the markets where actually we can actually provide the solution to them, and then they can achieve that with the framework that we actually can set for them. Yeah. So actually for us in overall achieving 70% renewable energy by 2050 for Malaysia is actually quite promising, right? Yeah, just that we need to have a right platform, right educational awareness sharing to the potential clients so that they know, okay, it is not far and it's not difficult for them to achieve. Yeah, over back to you.
Yeah, good to know that it's possible to achieve 70%. So what is your view, Aurora, whether we can achieve 70% from carbon market perspective?
Oh, if you ask me, of course, I'm very optimistic about our future. Otherwise, I wouldn't. Being in this industry, I believe we all can achieve whatever we are set up to, even though very challenging. But as long as we are working towards that, we can achieve that target. So for carbon market, it is very challenging in Malaysia, mainly because the lack of compliance mechanism in place. So companies, they are based on their voluntary basis to purchase carbon credits. But the awareness, even though in the past few years we have been working very hard, but the awareness is still relatively low compared to other countries. So it is still in a very nascent stage. Government of Malaysia in last year budget 2020 announced that it is going to implement carbon tax in 2026. So it will serve as a regulations, and we are hoping that this can incentivize compliant entities if they are allowed to use carbon offset to offset part of their taxable emissions. Then it can generate some demand to our carbon projects. Maybe I'm not sure how our participants are familiar with carbon market, but carbon market, to develop a carbon project, there's a high barrier, especially in Malaysia, particularly in the cost, in the regulations uncertainties, and also there's a lack of capacities. So to develop a carbon project, it takes 3 to 5 years from the very beginning to generate the credit. So you need a lot of upfront investment. So these are all the challenges, but now we are seeing that when the compliance market kick in, it can provide some certainty on demand, and hopefully we can also provide some price signal on the carbon credits from Malaysia. And also because of the Article 6 under Paris Agreement that achieved kind of like a conclusion last year in the Conference of Parties in Azerbaijan end of last year. So the Article 6 trading can also serve as a new market for Malaysia carbon project to maybe to supply some high quality credits from Malaysia to international market. So these are some of the challenges, but if you are asking me, I would say that carbon market is a tool, like many other tools that Hoong and also Monique mentioned, is one of the climate tools to help decarbonization for the companies and also for the nation. So we are not advocating for using carbon credit for everything. So there is a carbon management hierarchy. You should do decarbonization first, you should reduce them, and if really cannot, then you can use carbon credit to offset your residual emissions. And that's also the concept of carbon pricing, putting a price on carbon. So instead of doing nothing and not buying carbon credit, at least companies that are taking voluntary action to offset their emissions, they are actively putting a price in their supply chain for the emissions. So this can help advise their future procurement decisions, and hopefully will help them to accelerate their decarbonization process. So that I think that is, I hope this can answer your questions so far.
Yeah, I think Aurora has already mentioned some of the key challenges from carbon market perspective. So right now, let's hear from Monique more on what are the initiatives that Hawaii state government has done so far and any challenges that you have faced. And also maybe you can highlight some of the interesting or notable achievements so far. Is there any carbon tax or policies from Hawaii side similar to Malaysia, or any other distinguished policies that you would like to highlight? Yeah, Monique, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, interesting. So our biggest or our law with what I would say like has the most teeth is our renewable portfolio standard. So that is solely really for the electric generation portfolio, and it is a law that applies to our two private utilities. So we only have the Hawaiian Electric Company, and they control 95% of the electricity in the state, and then Kauai Island Utility Cooperative, which has about 5%, and it's on Kauai, one of our islands. So for those of you that aren't familiar with the Hawaiian Islands, there's, Hawaii Island, Maui, Molokai, Lanai, Oahu, which has Honolulu. So that's the largest sort of population base, largest grid, largest demand, and then Kauai. And all of the islands have separate grids. So when you look at sort of the percentage of renewable electricity generation, the island that is farthest along to date, it used to be Kauai, but they had some issues with their biomass plant to show that, you know, progress isn't always a straight line. You kind of hit some curveballs as you go along. But Hawaii Island actually has it's achieved about 59% renewable energy. Kauai is at about 51%, and it actually does have days where it operates the grid itself at 100%, which is pretty incredible. On the other end of that, Oahu, or the most populous island with Honolulu, and all of, you know, the military and large demand, we're only at about 31%. And it's taken a while to get there. We were pioneers and were the first to launch a renewable portfolio standard. You know, I think just to speak to what Hoong said, you know, 70%, when we model 70% for the intermittent wind, that seems it's very, very, very achievable. It's that last 30%, the last 20%, and the last 10% that really becomes very challenging. So while we're focusing on the solar, the wind, the intermittent adoption, we know we're going to need some thermal generation. And for those sources, it's really, really important that there's also carbon intensity and life cycle emissions considerations, because we know that not all our law is based on renewable energy, but not all renewable energy is completely clean and low carbon. So we are starting to look at carbon intensity, or your emissions per kilowatt hour, along the entire supply chain. So if we're importing, say, a fuel, like say it's clean hydrogen or biofuels or some other source of energy, we're looking at the actual like production emissions associated with that, because we know, for example, clean hydrogen, most of the hydrogen on the market today is very, very dirty. And, you know, it would be a shame for us to count that as a win. So that's definitely, you know, where we're at with the renewable portfolio, the electricity generation side of things. And then, you know, the market we've really relied heavily on the market and federal tax credits and incentives to drive particularly vehicle electrification. And right now, with the new administration, we're in a huge pot of uncertainty. nationally, I would say, as to where progress will be. And, we were definitely starting to see some progress happening, and it's certainly becoming more of a challenging climate, unfortunately. But states still do have a role to play. We are very much a state leader, states need to lead. And I think that's where Hawaii and other states are stepping up to lead on the transition. But we also have to balance incentivizing these transitions with our economic position. So pass back over to you, Carleen.
Yeah, Monique, I think it's very interesting to know. It's the same thing when I learned from you last year. I actually was a fellow with Monique last year. So I was exposed to how different composition of state of Hawaii meant. So Hawaii is often in the eyes of Malaysian. We may actually think that it's referring to one island, but actually it's not. So it often actually refers to eight big island, Hawaii itself. So just now, Monique did mention there are two types of the private utility provider. For example, Hawaii Electric control 90%, 95%, and another 5% is controlled by the cooperative utility provider. So it's actually different from Malaysia, where we only have one national utility provider, which we call it as Tenaga Nasional Berhad, TNB. But Hawaii is very interesting, where the private companies provide the electric for the islands. So this is just an educational statement that I'm trying to educate my friends from Malaysia here, because I was also find it very interesting when I was aware that private utility providers actually provide the energies to Hawaii. So right now, maybe we can now go back to Ching Hong. Malaysia energy transition is largely focused on solar PV. So from your perspective, what other renewable technology, for example, offshore wind, small hydrogen, or biogas, are these actually realistic for Malaysia to diversify our energy mix over the next decade using all these, or any other types of the renewable technology that we can utilize?
Yeah, thanks, Carlin, for asking these questions. I think for the next decades, right, solar is still the most cost-effective way to deploy, right? Because the ease of installation, the timeline of installations or deployment is also very fast, and very straightforward, where you just have the panels and then cables, inverters, and then to the grid. That's it. You don't have to do much operation except cleaning the weeds and maintaining the site, right? So that's where the cost of the generation of power from solar is actually at a win rate of 17 cent Malaysian ringgit to 25 cents Malaysian ringgit. If we convert to USD, it's only 4.2 to 5.8 cents USD, right? So if you compare to others solutions like a biogas, right, biomethane, those are actually more than 6 cents USD or 7 cents USD. So like even though you mentioned about hydro, also 6 cents USD is actually double or triples of the solar generation cost. So I'm not expert in this IE industry, but based on the information that I have for the next decade, I believe if there's not much changes in terms of new technology launching or the economic of skills of other renewable source, right? Then this will be still the main RE technology that we are in Malaysia right now. Maybe Monique can share about how RE works. Yeah.
Yeah, I was about to ask Monique how Hawaii works for this. Do you have any other types of the RE that Hawaii state government is trying to explore aside from solar and wind?
Yeah, and I can say there's kind of two main components of solar, and that's the rooftop solar that folks put on their houses, and incentives and work towards that is very different than, say, the utility scale solar that's the ground mounted, covers more land area, And then most of those all have to be paired with some form of battery storage right now. And we require that at this point. So some of our older solar facilities were able to be built out without battery storage, but because we've reached a level where renewable energy penetration is so high, there's significant curtailment during the day. So we have to start storing the energy, which is what is adding to the costs. Another thing that's really a challenge just on Oahu, the most populous island, is land use constraints. As an island, to develop the amount of solar that we forecast as needed, it takes up a large portion of our land mass, and that's a lot of agricultural land. And, land is also not cheap on the islands. So a lot of times development costs, the further you get along, increase quite significantly because of the cost of land. Other technologies are indeed wind, which again, we're facing issues with being potentially sited too close to communities because there's the shadow flicker and there's concerns there. And then just the intermittency is also challenging. We were looking at offshore wind for a while, and that's definitely going to be more difficult with the new administration. And it was already difficult given, our ocean's so deep. We are a volcanic island in the middle of the Pacific, so they would have had to have been floating. Interconnection would have been definitely a huge challenge. As far as other, we are looking at, bioenergy. We have a trash incinerator that is an important resource. But all of those, we have to carefully look at sort of the carbon impacts associated with them. So right now, solar and batteries, in short, the name of the game, but it's becoming a harder game to play.
Yeah, thank you, Monique, for sharing this. So right now, perhaps we can put on the lens of carbon market, Aurora. So one of the innovative solution is the creation of carbon market, and they are gaining traction in Malaysia. So many companies are now turning to offset as they are part of net zero strategy. However, how do we make sure carbon markets complement the real emission reduction and not replace it? Any safeguard that you think we should put in place, or any kind of incentive we can give to the private companies to encourage them to go into carbon market? So Aurora, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. That's actually a very good question. I guess what you're asking is referring to a concept in carbon market that we call additionality. So basically, carbon market, I always trying to simplify this by telling people that carbon market is trying to make impossible possible. So what do I mean by saying impossible possible? So carbon market is not trying to support what is already possible under a business as usual scenario. Under the business as usual scenario, people, for example, like Malaysia, solar is already been a very mature industry in Malaysia. So in a business as usual scenario, it will continue to grow with or without carbon market. So in Malaysia, actually solar industry, grid connected solar is not considered eligible for carbon to become a carbon project because it is seen as non-additional. So the additionality is can be simplified by saying it will support the mitigation project that would not have happened without the sales of carbon credit. So basically, it is support something that with huge barriers. One is the financial barrier. The project developer has to justify the financial additionality by putting in their project design document saying that without the sales of carbon credit, without turning this project into a carbon project, without the income of carbon project, I cannot implement this project in Malaysia or anywhere in other countries. that justify the financial additionality of a carbon project. But additionality is not only about financial additionality, also regulatory surplus. That means if a project or an activity is already regulated by law or required by law, then it is seen as non-additional. For example, in Malaysia, we have palm oil industry, right? So in the palm oil mill facilities, before 2000, I think, if I'm not wrong, before 2000, early 2000 or mid 2014, so a lot of palm oil mill effluent, they are just left to decay and release very potent greenhouse gas to the atmosphere. But later on, Malaysia has these regulations requiring this palm oil mill to have methane capture facility, basically to cover the whole area of the effluent and capture the methane from preventing them to be released to the atmosphere. So from that point onwards, palm oil mill facilities that exceed certain threshold are required by law to have this system installed on their facility. So these facilities that require by law to do this activity is now no longer additional under the carbon project. But the palm oil mill facility that is below the threshold is still considered additional, because for them, this is still, there's still a financial barrier to do so. There's no incentive for them to do so. So carbon project comes in to incentivize small palm oil mill to also install this system on site to capture methane, and then therefore reduce the emissions being released to the atmosphere. So we have talked about financial additionality, regulatory surplus, and another one is the technical barriers. So for example, EV charging point right now, although it's not as rocket science, but the penetration rate is very, very low. So to help accelerate the installation of EV charging or the transition to EV car, EV charging is considered additional in most of the countries, unless your penetration rate, if I'm not mistaken, is above, for example, like 5%. But all these requirements are clearly stated in the carbon project methodologies. So maybe a very quick introduction about how the carbon standard works. So usually when you want to turn some activity into a carbon project, first of all, you need to identify a carbon standard that can help certify your project. So in international, we have many major independent carbon standard, for example, Verra Gold Standard. And there are non-profit organizations trying to set up the standard to certify carbon project. And under the standard, they will have rules and also requirements, not only on their governance, but also for the infrastructure, for example, a carbon registry. And also, they will also develop methodologies that help to quantify the carbon activities. How do you do calculation? For example, the EV project that we are talking about. Once we install the EV charging point, right? How do we know how much emission reduction can be achieved from this activity compared to the business as usual scenario? So the methodologies, inside the methodologies, there will be requirement. So what you are concerned just now, the additionality is the basic requirement for all the credible carbon standards. There are also other core carbon principles that carbon standard need to adhere to consider as high integrity. So the emission must be real. It cannot be like there's nothing been done, there's nothing, and then you just create carbon credit. You need to have real measurement. You need to have real calculation. You need to have evidence to showcase how much emissions have been reduced from these activities. And these results have to be verified by a third-party verification and validation bodies to help uphold the integrity of the carbon market. But of course, carbon market, no one that I know from the industry will say that carbon market is perfect. It is evolving, full of issues, and the fundamental problem of the carbon market is our understanding on environmental science It's not perfect. Human beings are still learning how nature works, how much mangrove can absorb carbon from the atmosphere. We are still learning, perfecting our methodologies. But as the real principle has said, the precautionary principle emphasize that a lack of complete scientific certainty should not be a barrier for taking action to prevent environmental damage when there is a threat of serious or non-reversible harm to the environment. And I believe now we are already in this stage. We need to take urgent action, even though no action is perfect, but we need all action to come together to help us to achieve a very, very challenging 2050 net zero target.
Yeah, very inspiring, Aurora. Right now, I feel like also being more environmental friendly after this talk. So I think now that Aurora has mentioned about the carbon market. Actually, I'm interested to know from Monique perspective. For example, how are digital tools like carbon accounting and also from Jing Hong later, things like MRV, how can we use energy monitoring from Solarvest side or emission ERV being used as one of the technology to make decarbonization real and measurable? So how are we leveraging carbon accounting, emission ERV, or energy monitoring to drive more precise and proactive decarbonization strategies in your region? Monique, maybe you can start first for carbon accounting side.
Yeah, sure. And I think Aurora kind of already touched on it, and it has to be real and it has to be measurable, right? And to me, carbon accounting is the framework that determines, okay, is it real? Is it measurable? And our sort of view on it right now, we use carbon accounting for the regulatory side of things. So we don't have carbon markets. We're not really doing any sort of purchasing of offsets. And we got construction going on. So Friday night, they're like, ooh, party. I think where we're at with carbon accounting is, okay, you claim that this bioenergy feedstock is 20 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per metric ton of fuel. So that's really how we use a carbon accounting, but I think it applies to carbon markets as well if you're purchasing offsets. If there's, trees that are being planted, are they being planted, in a way that is preserving soil systems? Do you have to do a lot of agricultural inputs? Do you have to add fertilizer to grow, feedstocks that you're accounting those emissions from every sort of life cycle stage? And that's just one example. If you're preserving a forest and accounting for that as a sort of credit on the market, you really have to make sure that that forest wouldn't be preserved. Like, would it have been preserved anyway? Who knows? I think that there's a lot of challenges, and then how much carbon is even within that forest, and that's like a huge question because you have to look at soil, biological diversity, and Aurora touched on it. We just don't know. We know, but we don't know. A lot of it's underground. There's above ground carbon. There's whole microbiome to consider, and I think carbon accounting tools are getting better, but we have to use precautionary principle when applying them. And then there's a huge temporal component, and the temporal sort of timeline, all of those key assumptions that you plug into your calculation can really change how the output of your carbon savings. So again, I think our perspective is really making sure that that's offsets are the last option on the table, and it's really for what's hard to decarbonize.
Yeah, thank you, Monique. Perhaps Jin-Hong, you can share how Solarvest measure the real impact.
Yeah, I think it's in the past decades or 100 or 200 years, right? People measure the operational cost. It's just human cost, material cost, right? All these are actually part of our P&L, right? But nowadays, people talk about carbon credits, carbon accounting. So we are including the environmental cost into our operation as well, right? So monitoring and measurements of the actual environmental costs now is very important. So that's why we need the carbon accounting software, carbon accounting monitoring system. So I would touch more on the energy sector. This is where my main is, right? So maybe a big history of the monitoring systems. Like people in the past, people are monitoring for the sake of scheduling, automating the process for output. But because of the environmental cost is increasing over the time, so people start to aware. So how can I measure, right, the efficiency, the measures output over power consumptions, right? So that's where it comes in the new terms called equipment performance monitoring system. So built on top of the building management system, right? How much I produce, how much power that I use to produce. So these are the key matters that people are talking about right now. So without measuring, we won't be understanding our baseline. So we have no way to reduce or increase the efficiency level. So give you an example. So now the monitoring system becomes more purpose driven. Like monitoring system, you have a cooling system. What is your efficiency level right now? It's not just about the automating, the scheduling, the process of supplying the cooling system to the environment or to the building environment, right? So we talk about COP, we talk about many others parameters of the equipments so that we understand understand the efficiency level of the buildings so that we know how to treat it. So it involves of collecting of data, process the data, verify the data, and automate the process to make sure that the efficiency level is actually become better and better and better. So Solarvest is actually providing these kinds of monitoring system come with purpose, okay, specific purpose to help the clients to achieve the whatever energy saving or efficiency level. And one of the example that we are talking about is the maximum demand, where we need to control the maximum demand. I'm not too sure whether everybody's notice about, because maximum demand is actually harming the grid, where if we have a lot of fake maximum demand that draw power from the individual plants level, grid level, if let's say it's a lot of waste on maximum demand, the grid will have to increase the capacity of power generation. So that's where the cost imposed back to the client. So we are helping them to reduce the maximum demand by installing smart hub and auto visualize all these fake peak demands, so we can have some strategy to help them to solve that. So I'm from the individual level or business level for the clients, or services that we can offer to to them. Yeah. Over back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Jin-Hong. Actually, right now, I'm also curious to know from Aurora, because just now you did mention the carbon capture and utilization and storage. So in a way, perhaps you can share what is the future of carbon trading and tax in Malaysia, any opinion on potential bill in Malaysia, and what are the other potential reform initiatives that Malaysia is trying to doing to push for adoption of renewable energy and decarbonization?
Thanks so much.
CCUS, yeah.
Yeah. So under the independent standard, for example, Verra, there's actually a methodology, but not for CCUS, for CCS. So carbon capture and storage, not including the utilization. So the bill that you're talking about, I'm not the expert in that, also not an expert from CCUS. But what I understand is that from a very interesting technical working group under the Ministry of Finance, led by the World Bank Group, It's called a Partnership for Implementation study on the carbon pricing instrument. Malaysia actually is one of the largest, maybe it's top 5 in terms of the carbon storage. So if you are asking my personal opinion, I would say that carbon storage is essential because right now in the atmosphere, we already have too much greenhouse gases. And even if we stop emitting right now, the climate change will continue for decades. It will not stop because all those greenhouse gases that's already in the atmosphere. And then that's why we need to capture them back to store in the ground and store it permanently. How to do it? There are many ways to do it. Direct carbon capture or carbon capture at the source point, like what you say, and also the nature-based solutions. All of them, they have benefits and also the problems that we must face. But these are the methodologies that they are trying to solve these critical issues, hand in hand with other methodologies. The Verra methodologies that I'm talking about is just carbon capture, and then you have to store it permanently underground. But you cannot use it to extract more fossil fuel from the ground. Yeah. So that's the difference from carbon project and having a carbon or having a CCUS. You can have a CCUS project, but it is not necessarily a carbon project. So in terms of other very innovative solutions that carbon project is trying to coming out is a recent development on the transition credit. So Verra is the biggest independent carbon standard in the world. They have about 70% of the market share across the world. So they're coming out with this early coal phase out methodology, whereby they trying to encourage developing countries, especially countries in Asia. They are heavily relying on coal power plant. So these carbon methodologies trying to use the sales of carbon credits to retire the very young coal power plants in Asia country. But to early retire coal power plant in Asia, the government has to compensate a lot of money because at the beginning, I'm not an energy expert, but Monique should know. At the beginning of the building of a big power plant, the government already signed up for like 50 years or I don't know, even longer term of agreement with the developer. So if we're talking about, climate justice, how do we justify that? By asking developing countries who needs to develop our economy so eagerly and ask them to now stop using their coal power plant. That is still very young, like 10 years, and they are still like 30 years of lifespan. Who is going to sponsor that? It's not just to us developing country or even least developed countries, government to compensate this big financial gap. So the transition credit come in to support the early coal phase out, and the coal power plant that is retired earlier can generate the carbon credit based on the emission reduction that have been avoided in the project scenario. So in the baseline scenario, the coal power plant will continue for another 30, 40 years and emitting so much emissions, right? So after this project is implemented, it becomes a project scenario. In this project scenario, there's no more coal power plant. And the difference between project and the baseline is the emission reduction. And that gap, that difference can be turned into carbon credits. But of course, if we are only doing this part by asking, by financially sponsoring coal power plant to retire early, it doesn't really solve the problem because electricity consumption is an inelastic demand. If we remove one coal power plant from the energy mix, our energy consumption will not reduce overnight. We still use a lot of electricity, aircon for everything that we need to use. So it will not reduce the emission. It will only be transferred to other coal power plant or other gas power plant. And therefore, the emission reduction will not be achieved. So in that methodology, it also requires the project developer to develop the same capacity of renewable energy together with the early coal retirement. so that any electricity consumption will be transferred to renewable energy to avoid what we so-called leakages. But this methodology is just released last month. So it's very, very new idea. So let's see what it can achieve. But I hope by using this example, we can get an idea of what carbon market is trying to achieve here. Like I said previously, is by making impossible possible. And without this kind of like creative climate finance mechanism, early retirement of coal power plant is highly likely impossible in Asia, unless someone that's very rich can sponsor our decarbonization effort in Asia. Otherwise, we really need all these creative solutions. Thank you.
Yeah, Aurora, perhaps maybe within the audience here, we may have some silent sponsors here. So don't worry. So right now, I actually quite curious to know Monique's perspective. What is your perspective on carbon trading? Is it a tool or just a shortcut? And later on, maybe Aurora, you can just stop up with one liner. Is there any risk of over relying on carbon offset? Or how do you encourage organization to actually prioritize actual emission cut first? So Monique, go to you first.
All right. So I would say, fully, we don't have, in the state, our utility doesn't, get involved with the carbon market. But where we do see it is large companies, for example, particularly aviation, United, Hawaiian Airlines, Delta, they do purchase these carbon credits on the voluntary carbon market. And I would say, Aurora hit on this, that there's a potential that they quickly become a permit to pollute, if you will. And whether or not that's a permit to pollute and comply with regulatory requirements versus sort of the consumers, I want to feel okay flying and not feel like I'm burning the earth flying, and therefore I'm gonna pay a little extra on my ticket and offset those emissions from my flight. That's because that's how I tend to see it in practice. And I see a lot of abuse of the offset market. While I recognize its need, I feel like we're at a point where it's just being abused so heavily that it has not effectively achieved its intended purpose. Because I think there is, documented cases of additionality or credits being sold to multiple parties. And knowing that we need these markets to fund particularly less developed countries to retire coal plants, we know we need some financial mechanism. When you see abuse of the system by these large corporations, it dwindles the trust, and that's very dangerous because it's needed, it's necessary, and I think we have a lack of trust because of greenwashing that has existed, bad players in the system, bad, verification programs, and it's not to say that they're fundamentally bad. It's just to say we need to do it a heck of a lot better. Because, as a regulator, say, 20 years down the road, change hasn't happened, it hasn't improved, and, the utility or, say the transportation companies or the airlines that operate within the state are saying, well, we'll buy credits to reduce our emissions. And, we're saying, okay, what credits are you going to buy? If there's no trust in the system, it puts the onerous on the state, the regulatory agency, HSEO. My office is not a regular, but I've been a regular state agency. It puts a lot of onerous on the state to either verify that or just say, no, you're going to reduce it, or no, you're going to pay the fines, and the company is going to pay fines. So I think we have a lot to do to improve the trust in the carbon market, because sadly it has largely been used as a permit to pollute. We haven't seen emissions reductions to date. We just see emissions growing. And unfortunately, carbon dioxide is also growing, and it's just at some point something's got to give, and we got to get a little bit more serious. But I'm glad to hear that, Aurora, you're talking about the exact concerns that I would have, as somebody, who would be more critical of carbon markets. So yeah.
Yeah, totally understand, Monique. So that is why I'm asking Aurora, is there any risk of relying on carbon offset? And how do you encourage to prioritize the real emission cut first?
Yeah, I think I agree with Monique. Actually, the people in the industry, they are very critical to themselves as well. The issues that we are talking about, it is always a topic that is discussed within the market. The industry players acknowledge that all these issues exist. For example, like greenwashing, the companies that only use carbon offsets to neutralize their emissions without any real decarbonization efforts. So in the past few years, there's a lot of, I would say, like improvements trying to help achieve a high integrity carbon market because of few cases. For example, at the demand level, we have the voluntary carbon market integrity initiative that provide a guideline for the buyers on how do you use carbon credits appropriately? How do you claim it accurately? You cannot just use carbon credit and then say you achieve net zero. It doesn't work that way. So they provide guidelines and then they work with the buyers trying to raise awareness. And on the supply side, we have the Integrity Council for the voluntary carbon market. It is like the standard over standard. So they are trying to set a global standard for a high integrity market. And they assess carbon standards, whether those independent standards like Verra gold standard meet their core carbon principles, whether these carbon standards achieve high integrity standards. So these are from both and demand side. And in the ASEAN region, Bursa Malaysia is actually mooting up this idea of ASEAN Common Carbon Framework, and it has been signed by the 5 Carbon Market Association in 4 ASEAN countries, Singapore, Thailand, Indonesia, and Malaysia. So in this ASEAN Common Carbon Framework, we are not trying to achieve a common carbon standard across ASEAN because it would be extremely challenging to do so. But what we are trying to achieve is also from the supply and demand side. From the supply side, we are urging like countries that are trying to develop their national standards should also adhere to the high integrity carbon market principles. For example, like ICBCM that I have mentioned, and another one that Monique just now has briefly mentioned, CORSIA, that is the one that is regulating the international flights of their emissions. So they set a very, very high requirements for carbon standard to adhere to. And on the demand side, we have also similar claim guidance for the government, for the companies on how to use the carbon credit. But I find it very, very challenging is that carbon market is highly technical, but it has received so much attention, at the same time criticism. So it is also part of my work to deal with the criticism. And I come from a non-profit background. I was an activist, and I always say that I will be an activist my entire life. But what I have seen is that a lot of criticism is based on fundamentally flawed analysis due to the lack of understanding on carbon market. I always open to like constructive feedback because I want this market to become better. I want it to really work so that we can keep our forest standing. But when the criticism come in, we don't see constructive feedback. It is a lot of time accusation that say that you didn't do this, what you are doing is wrong. But what in actual fact is we have done this. What you accuse us for doing, we didn't do. So it's like, a lot of time I know that this is a systematic issues because the knowledge of capacity building is very restricted to a very small group of people, project developers, policymakers, and some other industry players. We only have so much resources to do the capacity building. So I believe the next steps will be to expand this to include very, very important stakeholder, which is NGO and representatives from the communities, to help them understand how this market works, what we have done, but there is a gap. Can you help us to close this gap based on your expertise? So I think that is what is the market is trying to do now. A lot of work that we need to do, but I can finally close this by sharing an example which I personally felt is very important, and it is a dream for me to see it come true as an environmentalist. So mid of last year, Bursa Carbon Exchange would auction the Malaysia first nature-based carbon project. Can you imagine we are biodiversity country? We have like more than 50% of forest covered, but we only have the first forest project last year. And that project, it is in Sabah, and the size is about larger than Singapore. So that piece of forest is actually designated as a logging concession. And the project developer come in, and then they propose to the state government that, instead of do timber logging, there is another source of income that you could consider, which is not to cut down the trees, but still you can get some profit from selling the carbon credits. And the carbon credits are generated from the action of not cutting down the trees. So the action is not doing anything. And by doing nothing, not cutting down the trees, you can generate income for the state government who has the authority of our land use and land resources. And today, that piece of forest will be kept standing for the next 40 years minimum because of carbon project. Otherwise, that piece of forest, like many forests in tropical countries, will be cut down and maybe turn into palm oil plantation. Yeah, that's the example. And then when I see the project developers sharing the stories with the local communities and how they work together to improve their livelihood and all that, it is truly inspiring. And I'm very proud to see project like this happen in Malaysia.
Yeah, very inspiring for another 40 years of that piece of forest. So right now, Jin Hong, just curious, is Malaysia ready to scale up the second type just now mentioned by Monique? There are two types of the solar energy, right? So for the second type, utility scale solar energy infrastructure, solar farm, is Malaysia ready to scale up this in light of our rising industrial energy needs, especially driven by the booming data center industry in our Johor state?
Yeah, I think whether we are ready, I think we look at a few perspectives, whether the government's policy is ready. Second part is whether the solutions part suppliers is ready. And then third is, of course, the demand, right? So of course, the first one is government policy. So we have been using the CGB. Just for information, the CGB is actually the private and the power plants collaborations used to be there for this kind of collaboration to help the private sector to achieve the I100. but now it's already evolved from CGBP to CREST. So because there's a problem of over setting up the RE industry or the solar farms inject to the grid, there's a security risk or the energy security risk because all we know the renewable energy market power supply will depends on the sun hours, so it will be very fluctuating and it's not favorable to the grid, especially when we want to maintain a certain maximum demand for the entire power consumption. All right, that's where the CRESS comes in, where the large-scale solar will comes together with the power battery, what we call BESS, to stabilize the load, to charge when it is low demand, to supply when it is high peak demand, so that the power supply from the RE is actually constant, or to be more certain, that is more favoring to the grid. Then the third, this is more towards the policy side. The second part is, solar. I think you can see the LS1 until now LSS5. LS means large scale solar, right? It's already evolved the requirement over the time to find out or to solve the problem that we face in LSS1. I believe it will have LS6, 7, 8, right? So more and more requirement will be coming in to grow this market in terms of practicability and also the investors. You can also see that the government has allocated the fund for LS, and then our main power grid provider like TMB, they also allocated about 43 billion fund for floating solar, right? And then EPCC solar installer like Solarvest, we are also capable or what's that called? The expertise are there to get more LS projects. So demands data center is coming in, and then there's a way to reward the people who implement this. So in all, yes, I would say Malaysia is actually ready, which I think we are one of the most leading in terms of Asia Pacific for this kind of LS to support more data center to come to Malaysia. Yeah, this is my answer. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Jing Hong. Maybe I will put a question where three of you can also answer this. How can Malaysia and Hawaii attract more green capital and innovation into non-solar decarbonization area, such as industrial heat, process electrification, or energy efficiency retrofits? Any takers? Monique or Jing Hong?
I'll take this one. Capital's the big hard thing. And I'll be frank, we're in a rough situation right now with both our utility being dealing with a lawsuit due to wildfires that their power lines caused. But making sure that they have a good credit rating is kind of like core to making sure that they can borrow low cost capital. For other solutions, it really depends, and I think we really try to make sure as a state we're supporting initiatives, whether that's through tax credits. So the state income tax credit, we have a pretty generous tax credit for all renewable energy technologies, and that is, you can get it as an individual for solar energy, or the utility scale providers can also get that tax credit. So maintaining those tax credits, it was actually in our state legislature this last session proposed to be pulled back So we had to really lobby to make sure that the tax credits sort of stayed in place. For other technologies as well, geothermal is actually something we're really looking into, particularly for power generation. And that's a public trust resource, so it's ultimately owned by really native Hawaiians and the indigenous communities, but also the public. So it's our responsibility and our duty to sort of do the exploration and to fund that really through government funds before it would ever be able to develop. So that's one thing. And then we do still have some monies that we're working with from the federal government on efficiency programs. So heat pump water heaters. Water heating is a huge energy, it's a large part of our energy demand. So, reducing that, doing rebates for upgrades to HVAC systems and other rebates for reducing overall load is also really, really important. So we can ultimately retire our power plants or switch them to a cleaner fuel in the meantime. So bridge fuels we are looking at.
Yeah, I think on top of Monique answered just now, more on indigenous community. So I'm curious to know if Solarvest has any business model that you use to serve the underserved area in Sarawak or any rural areas that you are aware of, Ching Hong.
Yeah, for now, the rural areas, I think we are on the how to say corporate responsibilities manners where I believe that there's some events that have been doing that Solarvest actually donated some solar panels for rural area. So this is on the corporate responsibilities perspective, right? But I believe this will not be sustainable if everything's carried by donation, right? So what we believe is that whenever the activity is actually profitable for the investor, the activities will actually grow organically. So sometimes it based on the situation, is whether the governments need to have a soft start by giving some grants like what Monique mentioned, and then slowly the business will actually evolve or the activity will evolve by having some how to say it, when it hits the economy of scales, then it becomes a profitable business, and everybody's will actually will go into the participate the activities and move the entire economic growth, and at the same time it actually beneficial the rural area. So this is what we believe. We don't mind to be the first one to do this, and then to see to actually attract the attentions of the government. Then the government, when see the proof of concept, then they are okay to actually fund it, and then fund a little bit, then it becomes organically grow. Yeah, so that is how it works in business perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Ching Hong. So now that we are going to ask the person who is working in the government regulatory platform, Aurora. So there's a question from the audience. If the carbon market ecosystem in Malaysia is still very challenging, how is the Malaysia Carbon Market Association post-establishment helping to overcome these challenges? And do you engage with other stock exchange in the ASEAN region for interoperability? Thank you.
That's a very interesting question. So actually, the head of carbon of Bursa Carbon Exchange, she has about 20 years of experience working in the solar industry. She's the person that is one of the leading figure in the solar development in Malaysia. So she always shared with me that there are a lot of similarities between solar industry and carbon market. So in the beginning, when solar just started, like a lot of people don't know what is that. The price is very expensive. It is common, and there are con men, saying that if you install something, that then you can earn a lot of money, but in the end, you didn't get anything. And this is all happening right now in carbon market. So my boss is actually using the similar strategy. One of them is to set up the Malaysia Carbon Market Association, similar to the MPIA when she started it many years ago for the solar industry. So Malaysia Carbon Market Association was established mid of last year, and Bursa as one of the founding member. So the purpose to set up these association, they serve a lot of functions. Before this association, Bursa Carbon Exchange do everything. We do a lot awareness and all that, but we are only a very tiny little thing doing the trading platform, awareness, policy, advisory work, and all that. Having this association is important because it gather 9 very prominent companies in Malaysia to come together. Some of them are already a big player in carbon market, but some of them, they are very new. So it can help increase the awareness among the buyers and also the project developers. So they will be also developing some capacity building, capacity training program for the practitioner to understand how carbon market works. And Malaysia Carbon Market Association is also one of the signatory to the ASEAN Common Carbon Framework that we mentioned about. And they are actually working very, very hard with 4 other ASEAN Carbon Associations, trying to get this ASEAN Common Carbon Framework endorsed at ASEAN level. Once it gets endorsement at ASEAN level, it will be adopted by ASEAN countries to implement some policy or initiatives to achieve what has been set up in SCCF. And for the next question is on the stock exchange. Yes, we do talk to a lot of carbon exchange in the region. They are all like us, struggling very badly in this region. The liquidity is very low. The Singapore Climate Impact Acts, Indonesia IDX, and Thailand Stock Exchange, they are not currently trading carbon market, but they will be piloting ETS very soon in the next couple of years. So we exchange our challenges and all that. And in terms of interoperability, this is one of the key targets that we try to achieve under the ASEAN Common Carbon Framework, because we all acknowledge that ASEAN country, we all are very small, and then the market very small, the population very small. Opportunities is bigger if we come together, and it can help us to achieve this scalability and also better financial feasibility if we are interoperable. But in terms of how to do that, we are still in the very early stage to discuss that, because of like some people talk about one common exchange platform for all the ASEAN, but it's quite challenging because of the very stringent capital control that we have in different countries. Maybe I can conclude that by saying, in the early stage of a lot of initiatives, we all have similar issues. We lack of understanding, we lack of capacity, and there will be people that abuse the system, by using it wrongly or by cheating people to make profit. And this is all happening right now. But what we can do, in a positive way, is to find ways to enhance the integrity of the market by creating awareness, by supporting people, more people, including the regulators, including the stakeholders, including the NGOs, to help them to build the understanding on carbon market. Once this is all done, and it is actually left to each of us to decide whether this is the right tool that you choose to support or not. If this is not the tool that you believe is working, then there are plenty of other tools in the climate box, right? And then we can all work, in different areas and concurrently to achieve the same target.
Yeah, thank you so much, Aurora. I just have 2 more questions, one for Monique and another one for Jing Hong. Then we can conclude the webinar soon. So, Monique, how can countries with differing energy needs and capabilities work together meaningfully in decarbonization, especially when geopolitical tensions are rising? As for Jing Hong, for Solarvest perspective, if you now have the ability to change one policy or unlock one barrier to allow Solarvest to accelerate your decarbonization today, what would it be and why? Yeah, the floor is yours, Monique.
Great question. I think, just regardless of geopolitical tensions, humans are humans. I said at the beginning, island Earth is one planet. And, I think information sharing is, there's a lot of power in information. And, if there's areas where like Hawaii might be further along with our renewable integration, we're always wanting to share some of, okay, we've hit 40, 50, 60%, and these are the sort of challenges we're facing on our grid. And you can prepare other countries, other regions to prepare for those challenges, whether they're technical or financial, like inverters. It turns out they're really important. And having smart inverters when you reach high levels of penetration is critical. So if you invest in that upfront, it's not an issue later on. So I would just say, information is really, really critical. And then knowledge sharing, I learned a lot today just in this call. And I think, some of my apprehensions, for example, on the carbon market, I don't know if I'm totally convinced, but I have more research to do, and it sort of lights the bulb to do more research. So I think collaboration just in general with folks that are working towards the same end goal is invaluable, and hearing different perspectives. And having dialogue, even if there's not 100% agreement, that's really, really healthy. So I think with that, we know we have a common issue, and that is the carbon dioxide and the greenhouse gases in our atmosphere. And we have to work together for a solution. So I will end with that.
Yeah, thank you, Monique. I just dropped a link about energy state
Thank you.
Yeah, so that they can read more on all the efforts that you guys have been doing. So as for
Yeah.
perhaps you can
Yeah.
share.
Actually, we when in my past decades work with factories that we always wonder that how comes we can only install the on-site solar on our roof up to, I think last time was about up to 85% that of our maximum demand, means the total the highest demands that we draw from the grid. So I believe that this policy is actually meant to have to avoid the excessive installations of power solar, where it reduce the power drawn from the grid. So this is kind of like a security, energy security policy that to protect the grid to sustain their minimum maximum demand that supply to all the companies that require power. So I always wonder that how can we remove this barrier so that in private sector we have a more flexible in terms of planning our renewable energy generation on our side, right? But eventually these policies has been revolved due to the excessive request and also development of the solar, especially like large scale solar, to just unleash the flexibility of the power consumptions generated on our premise. So this policy has already been revoked, but new policy comes in where we need to have our battery, we need to have a surcharge just for the purpose of protecting the grid. So that would be, I think, eventually when there is a policy removed, then there is an additional policy being coming in to actually protect certain national security framework. So that's a dilemma. So from business perspective, of course, we want as flexible as possible so that we can actually do our business, be more flexible to propose it to the clients. But I think while performing all this kind of or getting all these kinds of individual interests for business level, we also need to think about the national security, right? Not only removing the policy at my personal interest, but instead we have to be very cautious while during this energy transition moment. I always listen to the board from Solarvest, right? They always mention that we are in a prime moment where we should attract more talents to get involved in this kind of prime movement of energy transition era. So we, as long as we follow these directions and get involved as a stakeholders to contribute these transitions, definitely in individual level or in corporate level or in government, in country level, definitely we will be beneficial from this prime era. So I just want to take this opportunity to share to the audience that energy transition is real. So we need more talents, we need more people, more creative ideas, or more experts to get involved to help not only the countries but to entire global. Because this is a real trend and real situation is happening right now, and the expert and the people get involved are still in very preliminary stage. So just conclude everything is in one of the curve that I always share to my peers. Every single adoptions or new technology adoptions, there's a curve or S, right? So we need to be in early adoptions where we talk about 1 to 3% of involvement. Then we survive until the 5% after that. Then you will have benefiting in terms of monetary, in terms of any kind of benefit, either is direct and indirect. Then from there, when the trend and the how to say the especially the energy transition roadmap, energy transitions trend right now. Yeah, so I urge everybody's, in the audience side to find your key role and get involved in this movement. Yeah, over back to you, Karen.
Yeah, thank you all for really sharing all your valuable insights today. We have seen how decarbonization is not a single track. It's actually a multi-dimensional effort that spans across policy, private companies, and also carbon market from Bursa exchange side. So from Hawaii diversified renewables to Malaysia carbon market leadership and industrial strategies, the lessons shared today will show that collaboration and bold thinking will define our future. So let's continue to build the bridges between the sectors and region, because the energy transition must be both local and global. So thank you all for your time today. I hope you learned a thing or two today. And also don't forget to join Solarvest, Bursa Malaysia, and Hawaii State Energy Office as part of the change. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Monique. Thank you, Aurora. And also thank you, Ching Hong. My name is Kar Ling. I will sign off right now. Thank you.
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
See you all in our next webinar. Bye-bye.